Okay, so Mark or Bart, do you guys have organizer? Um,
Yes.
yeah, I am not seeing the one that says start broadcast, like start the sound. Do you see it on your screen?
It started, I think we're broadcasting already.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is Claudia Johnson. Apologies for the difficulties at the beginning. We're doing the LHI National Technical Webinar, which is a webinar we do each year at around the last quarter of the year with LSC TIC funds. And what we aim to do in these webinars is to give you a nugget of technical and know-how, maybe a more advanced type training so that you can fully use all the features in Law Help Interactive. So without more, I will introduce our faculty. I'm actually gonna let them introduce themselves. They really don't need introduction. They're very well known in our community. They're Bart Errol and Mark Lauritsen, both from Capstone Practice, and I will pass it to them.
Sounds good, Claudia. Um, I just want to be sure that, in fact, our audience can hear us, so I'd appreciate it if somebody out there would chat a note to us saying that's the case.
And we have a couple of people saying yes.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Okay.
All right. So I'm Mark Lauritsen. I'm here with Bart Earl. We're from Capstone. And we're going to give you an overview of uh, multiple document assembly on LHI, which is a very powerful technique. Just trying to get my screen a little more visible. A very powerful technique. It's actually quite easy to use, but it's got a number of complexities and potential pitfalls. So we're going to try to cover all that in about an hour and then have time for questions and comments. So today's focus is on, and I would ask anybody who is not muted to mute themselves. Claudia, you might want to do that in background here. I'm hearing a little echo.
Okay.
Um, the focus is really how do you cause LHI to generate not just a single document for a user but multiple files, and we're going to touch on what can be done in that area, why you might want to use it, most importantly how do you use it, and a couple tricks and pitfalls that you may encounter as you try to use it. So a very common practice historically on LHI has been to put multiple documents into a single output file, essentially creating packages or packets of documents. You might think of these as collections of virtual documents like a cover letter and a motion and an affidavit, all included in a single file. Or in the case of PDF documents, you might have multiple different forms that need to be filed as part of a proceeding. And that's been long established. You can do one or the other in a single assembly session. You can have a single output document, a RTF or a Word docx file that has multiple virtual documents inside of it, or you can have a single PDF that has multiple forms inside of it. Again, very common, but quite limiting. It's done using either simply including all the stuff you want in on one level in a document template, or you can use insert statements to reference other templates and to have them all assembled together into a single file. Again, it's quite common, but several years ago we concluded that was really too limiting and that we wanted to have the capacity on the server to actually assemble multiple files out of a single session, a single interview. Sticking with inserts for a second, you can put the inserts right in the body of a template. We're going to get examples in a few minutes, so I apologize for kind of this boring text. You can have insert statements in a text template. You can have insert statements in the control field in a PDF template. And you can include insert statements also inside of a computation, although Hot Docs Only will respect one insert in each example. Let me just switch for a second to an example of both of these, kind of the historical, straightforward, single file templates that we've always had on LHI. This is an ancient one. This is an eviction defense system that illustrates the idea of a template here. I'm just previewing it on the screen, where I'm doing all of these inserts. Based upon the user's selections and the state of the answer file, I'm inserting answers, notices, requests. And so potentially, in a given session, a user could answer the questions in such a way as this single document that gets assembled has all of these virtual documents inside of it. And in fact, this template here, answers and counterclaims, for instance, if we were to go into that, has inside of itself even further insert statements. So you can kind of nest these templates inside of each other and construct a single experience for the user at the end in terms of a document, even though inside of it there are in fact multiple logical or virtual documents. So that's kind of how you see this playing out, and this is familiar territory in text templates. The same thing is possible in PDF templates. So this is a complex PDF template that has literally 50 or 60 forms inserted into it. Depending upon the facts of a case and the user's preferences, it creates a single PDF at the end consisting of these multiple forms, potentially 40 or 50 pages of forms, all in one file. You'll notice, by the way, that at the very end of this one, besides the insert statements, which most of these are, there's an assemble. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, is how do you go beyond a single file that has a lot of virtual documents inside of it to a true collection of multiple files. So that's really the focus of this session, is let's see how we do that. How do we actually give the user the experience of not just getting a single file with multiple contents in it, but separately downloadable files at the end, where you're not restricted to only PDF or only RTF. You can have one or more of both. And each one that you can have can internally have multiple of these, more than one of these virtual documents inside of it. I know it's kind of confusing, and part of the confusion comes from our word document. We sometimes use the word document to mean a file, and sometimes we refer to it as the internal logical components of a file. Anyway, this is where we're at today. How do you create multiple files? There's not a lot of this yet being taken advantage on LHI, which is one reason for this call so far. But I think, as you will see, it's actually very useful and pretty straightforward to do it. Unlike the insert statements, which are used to create contents inside of a single file, assemble instructions are used to create discrete output files. And so you can think of what we're talking about here as multiple file assembly, which is a kind of a special kind of multiple document assembly. So we have these two different acronyms we sometimes throw around, MDA and now MFA. Likewise, technically, as a preview, we're going to see some examples a little further in this call of how this all gets scripted in a concrete template. But you can put an assemble statement right in the body of a text template, just like an insert. You can put it in a control field in a PDF template, like we just saw a minute ago. You can put them right inside the interview computation for a hot docs interview. So the interview itself will spawn multiple assemblies once the user finishes the interview. And you can put assemble statements also in computations. So just to make this a little bit more graphical, historically LHI would allow you to do one of these. You could do a single word file, RTF historically, and now also docx, with a single logical document in it. Or you could have a single word file that had multiple documents, like that eviction defense thing I just showed you. But you can only get one of these, one word file or one PDF file. And with the PDF file, again, it could be a PDF that consists of a single form, or it could be multiple logical forms, multiple separate forms strung together in one file. And that's been the case for LHI from the get-go. You could do one of these. What's happened circa 2012 is that we enabled multiple file assembly on LHI, which now lets you produce packages, outputs for a session where you can have more than one of each. So you could have a Word file and a PDF, you could have 3 Word files, you could have 5 PDFs, you could have any combination you would like. And then internal to these files, again, you still have the capacity to have multiple virtual documents inside of them. So this gets you pretty much every scenario you might imagine as far as satisfying a user with just the right document or documents they need at the conclusion of their interview. Hey Bart, feel free to jump in, of course, at any point to add color or commentary to what I'm saying so far. That's the what. What can you do? You can do all this stuff I just showed you here. You can create the experience of the user being given as many documents in the sense of separate files as they may like, and each of these can be of a PDF or RTF for DocX, and they can internally have multiple logical documents as the case may require. So what's the point? Why would you want to assemble more than one file? And these are some of the reasons to do it. One is the user is going to want the files, the documents as separate files once they have finished assembling them and they're downloading them. For instance, if there's e-filing involved, you may need these documents separately to be separately processed in a case management or court e-filing system. Some advocates prefer to have the separate documents in a case, various motions and letters, etc., managed as separate files so they can keep track of them in their document management system and edit them individually. So those are reasons that would motivate multiple files as opposed to this single composite file that I described earlier. Secondly, if you want to have an experience where the user gets both Word and PDF, and part of the documents needing to be generated are graphical forms, not just word processable documents, the only way you can do that is to have two different files come out. So that's another common use case for this functionality. And another motivation for those that have done a lot of HotDocs Word authoring, you probably noticed that when you insert Word templates inside of others, you run into some challenges in terms of maintaining headers, footers, pagination, other kinds of section behavior. And that can be pretty hair-pullingly complex to deal with. So one answer for that is to just create separate output files. Each one stands on its own, and you don't run into that complexity. So those are reasons to do them. What are the downsides? One downside is for the user, instead of getting document and having a single link that's their document at the end, they could present it with two or more on the screen, and so they have to discreetly click each one and manage each one separately. There's potential for user confusion in that scenario, where users may neglect to grab all the files that they want or lose them on their end. And there is a certain degree of development and maintenance effort to deal with the technicalia we're about to cover. But I think in short, these motivations are very compelling in many situations, and so if those of you on the call have run into these considerations, you should definitely consider doing these multiple files. Let me jump again to a user experience of how one of these works. So here I am on LHI. I'm in the contributor portal, and I've got an example of a multiple document assembly template. This happens to be a consumer debt package in New York aimed at advocates. So let me run this. I somehow have lost my login, but that shouldn't matter. I think I timed out while I was waiting for this call. Okay. I won't answer much here, but in this case, you might want to generate an answer and also a demand for documents, just to illustrate two. And I'm not going to answer any other questions. They're not going to matter as far as this demonstration goes. But typically, I would have, provided all my data about the client and the case and the proceeding and my defenses, etc. But mechanically, upon finishing a interview for a HotDocs template that's scripted to produce multiple documents, the big difference for those that haven't seen this is that when I get my document, rather than the expected single get document button, I've got two. I've got an answer and a demand letter. So this is the main thing the user experiences. As many documents as you script to be assembled produce their own name and button on this page. And this could be a combination of RTF, DocX, or PDF output documents, all individually downloadable and useful. So let's get into some of the basics of how you do this and what you need to think of as you do it. One is that this functionality is available for both A2J guided interviews and Hot Docs interviews. There's different some limitations on the former, but you can have an A2J guided interview result in a whole cascade, a whole bouquet of output documents once they've finished the interview. You can use logic, if statements, and repeats in your scripts to control which documents, which files are assembled under what circumstances, just like anything else you can do in a template. And you can initiate the assembly of a PDF from inside of an RTF or DocX template, or vice versa. So you can do some pretty interesting permutations and combinations of these assembled statements. And Hot Docs, as far as we know, does a good job of respecting your commands. The basic mechanics are to put assembled statements, we'll see an example in a few minutes, either right in the Hot Docs interview template, and that's only possible with Hot Docs because there's no interview when you're doing there's no Hot Docs interview when you're doing an A2J module. Or you can put the assembled statements in the body of your templates, RTF or PDF. And both Hot Docs and A2J can initiate those kinds of templates and therefore initiate the assembly. And the basic syntax is, in quotes, you have the assemble in caps, capital letters, the name of your template, and what's called a command line argument, in this case /NW, which means no window, Bart. Is that right? You're probably mute, but chime in if you have a comment on this. And this little footnote here, Bart, I think also came from you, which is when you're invoking the assembly inside of a Hot Docs template, you need to be sure the logic is in the actual template, not in the interview.
I'm not 100% sure about that because I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means. You're saying if you have, I mean, you can put the assemble command in either the body of the template or the interview.
Right.
And I believe that you can have you're saying the logic to drive the other assembled documents has to be in the main template, basically, either in the main template or its interview. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Yeah. The only thing I don't know is if in desktop Hot Docs it's possible to generate additional interviews, so you could sort of string interviews together, but I don't think that will work on LHI. So what works in desktop is a little different from what will work in LHI here. And some implementations of Hot Docs Server will generate an extra interview if you don't use the /NW or any similar command line argument. But LHI, I think you're just going to get one interview regardless.
Right, but you do need this /NW command, I believe, for it to function on LHI.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. One twist for people who have tried this is if you want to actually see the server behavior emulated on your desktop, in other words, get the documents assembled as you would expect, you need to add another another command line parameter, STW, which stands for Send to Word Processor, Bart. Is that the?
That's basically it, although it works similarly for PDF templates as well.
So up until recently, up until the new version of LHI, the rebuild, you had to be careful to remove that after you tested on your desktop and before you upload it on the server. But that's no longer required. So those of you that go back with this technique before last year, that's one step you can avoid worrying about. You can leave that parameter in. And so generally what you want to do is have both this NW and the STW present. That way you can emulate it reasonably well on the desktop and it'll behave on the server. And Bart, you talk about this /ni switch is another, it's a alternative way that will result in previews of documents on the desktop. I haven't tried that myself.
Yeah, it means no interview, and in the desktop you'll get a preview of the document even though you don't get asked any questions. And on the server, I don't know if I've tried it recently, but way back when I tried it, and it has the same effect as, it works just as well as NW, but I wouldn't suggest using it only because you don't get the same effect in the desktop that you get on the server, which is a single interview and then a bunch of documents. I think you want to, and I don't know what other ramifications it might have to use the /ni. I never use it, so I've never explored all the ins and outs of it.
We may remove that from these slides before they get posted, just not to confuse people. One more basic slide on this stuff, and then I think I'll turn it to Bart to show some of this in action. In PDF templates, you can invoke a PDF template through an assemble in the interview, or an assemble statement in the RTF or a docx template. And you can also invoke PDF assemblies from within control fields in the PDF file itself. Let's stop there, Barton, and why don't we have you take over screen for a second if you're game and show a couple of these permutations and what the actual syntax looks like.
Okay, I will change the presenter to myself and I will show my screen. Okay, so here's a template with an example of putting the assemble commands in the body of the RTF template itself. And it would look very similar if you used a docx template. Basically, you just insert an assemble field right in the face of the template. I'll just drop down here. I'll show you how that's pretty easy to do with your template open in HotDocs Developer. So there's, on the HotDocs ribbon in the middle here, there's this other fields, and if you click the drop down next to it, and then you click other field, which is an other field in other fields, it pops up this other field dialog, and the first choice here is assemble, and then you can drill down to your template, select it, and then it will insert. Let me just do one here for the heck of it. So I'll select it, and I click OK, and it's inserted my command. It doesn't insert the /NW and the /STW command line switches that were referred to. You have to type those in manually. You would type them in within the quotes thus. And this, when you upload your template, you upload the template that has the assemble commands in it, and that will be your main template. And if you're using an A to J interview, you have to put the assemble commands either in the body of the template, or in the case of a PDF template, you have to put it in the control field in the PDF template. The reason being, of course, is that when you run an A to J interview, you don't get a HotDocs interview. So it doesn't make any sense to put it in the interview. It won't work because the interview is not running, period. So if you're using A to J and you want to use multiple document assembly or multiple file assembly, then you need to put the assemble command either in the body of an RTF or docx template as here, or in the control field in the PDF template. Let me switch over to a PDF template so you can see what that looks like. So this is a PDF template open in Automator, and there's a control field right here. And what I've done with this control field, I'll open this up for editing. Let me just close these off. What I've done here actually is include a computation. I've associated a computation with the control field, and inside that computation I've got an assemble command. So the syntax here is very similar to what you would do in the body of a template, except of course that you're inside a computation, and then the name of the template and the command line switches are in quotes. Thus, the only difference here is, of course, is that there are no chevrons because we're inside a computation. No chevrons enclosing the assemble command and its target. One thing I should mention is it is possible in desktop HotDocs to include a path in your assemble command. So you could use a template that assembles a template that is in a totally different Windows folder from the main template. Don't do that if you're uploading to LHI, because when it gets to LHI does not know what that path means, and it's going to be totally confused, and you're going to get an error. Another thing I should point out is that assemble commands do not work in test assembly mode. In other words, if I'm in this template here, if I click test assemble here, I'll get the interview for this template, and I'll get the I'm going to get the output of this particular template, but I'm not going to get another document because it just doesn't work in test assembly mode. So if you need to test your template that has assemble commands in it, then you need to test from the library. You have to go out to the library and test by invoking it from the library rather than invoking it via the test assembly button. You can of course also test assemble the template on LHI as you normally would, but it's just the test assembly here inside Automator or the HotDocs developer tool that's not going to, in Word, is not going to work. So those are two examples. You could also, in your control field in your PDF template, you could also type in the assemble command with the quotes and so forth. You could actually put it in here and it'll work. You don't have to put it in a computation. But there isn't that neat tool that you have in Word, in the Word HotDocs tool, where you can have insert the assemble command. You have to do it totally manually. I suppose you could do it. In a Word template and then copy and paste it, but it's just a little more awkward. So I prefer to use computations, because then it's very easy to just associate that computation variable with the control field. One other place that you can do it, in addition to putting the assemble command in the body of a template, you can also put it in an interview. Now, let me show you an example of that. This is actually what HotDocs calls an interview template. We're looking at the component manager for it. If I go out to the library, this is the entry for it here, multi-document assembly interview. And I'm going to jump back to the... So in this interview, I'm going to open the interview for this template. It uses a custom interview. You have to use a custom interview with an interview-only template. So you have to script everything. And this is a very simple example. All it does is ask some variables. It was developed just for testing the functionality on LHI. And then it's got a whole bunch of assemble commands, which are similar to what you've seen before in the body of the template. But in this instance, it's actually going to run during the interview. And it will produce documents. And so it's possible you could have logic here in the interview that results in no document being produced at all. And you have to be aware that if you do that and the user tries to get their document, they're going to get an error on LHI. So you have to pay close attention to your logic, and if you really want to use an interview template that doesn't produce a document, then the best practice really is just to assemble sort of a placeholder document that says, you've completed the interview and, you're not getting any documents because X, Y, and Z. Much better than the user getting an error, because we don't at the present time support the ability to have an interview only template that where LHI doesn't expect some sort of a document to come out of it. When you embed the assemble command in a PDF template in the control field or on the face of a template, an RTF or docx template, there's always going to be at least one document that comes out of it, no matter what the logic, because that main document is going to assemble. So those are basically 3 examples of how to use the assemble command in your templates. A few other points just to raise here. One is that when you upload the template, you upload the main template, the template that has the assemble commands in it. And that means if it's a HotDocs, if you're going to use a HotDocs interview, you upload the main HotDocs template to LHI. It will bring with it all of the targets of the assemble command. It'll bring with it all the other necessary files. If you're using an A to J interview, then you're going to be associating the A to J interview with a HotDocs template. The HotDocs template that you associate with the A to J template also has to be separately uploaded, of course, and that should be the main template, the one that has the assemble commands in it. So, for example, if you were uploading this A to J interview to LHI and you wanted it to run this template here, which has, if I do a preview, this is the one with the assemble commands in it. What you would do is you would upload the A to J interview, then you would upload this template as your HotDocs template. Actually, the other way around. You would upload this one first, the HotDocs template first, and then the A to J module, and then you would associate the A to J module with this template. And when you upload this template, it's going to bring with it these 2 other templates that are targets of the assembly command. The other thing I wanted to say is that when you, in your development environment, one thing that's a good idea is for the main template, if you use the /nw command or command line argument where it's not going to generate another interview for every template that it assembles, then it's a good idea to, in the development environment, to go into the properties for your main template and add a command line argument /ss. This has absolutely no effect on the server, but what it does do in your development environment is that it will, when the interview finishes, it will warn you that you should save your answer file. So if you're doing testing in your development environment, it's kind of a pain in the neck if you do run through an interview and you save a test answer file, or you think you've saved a test answer file and you end up not saving it because you weren't warned that it wasn't saved. And the reason you have to do it is that HotDocs is smart enough to know, it sees all the assemble commands in the template, so it's smart enough to know that, hey, I'm going to be launching a whole bunch of other assemblies, but it thinks that because it's launching a whole bunch of other assemblies, that it's going to get another opportunity to warn you to save your answer file, because it's going to continue to use that same answer file through the whole process. When it gets to the last assemble command, HotDocs is thinking, I'll just warn this user, hey, you change your answer file, you better save it. But if you have the /nw command in place, then you never have another chance to save your answer file. So to counteract that, again, just in your development environment, you want to use this /ss command, which means suggest save. And that's just a convenience for you as a developer. It has no effect whatsoever. If you leave it out, it's still going to work fine on LHI. It's just that your test answers, you can lose them by accident if you don't include it. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that the title in the new LHI, the title of the template in the HotDocs library, so in this instance it would be Multi-Document Assembly Interview 3 Docs, that by default, when you upload the HotDocs template, becomes the title on LHI in the metadata that's presented to the user. So, and that title is also used if you have, for example, if you have the assemble command inside a PDF template or a Word RTF or DocX template, that title is going to be used for the first assembled document. So sometimes you're going to have a little bit of a conflict there because you may want to use as a title divorce package. On the other hand, your template might be, the first template that assembles might be divorce complaint, and that has assemble commands in it that assemble a summons and all other kinds of good stuff. So the remedy for that on LHI is that you upload the template the first time, and when you do, you change the title on LHI to the name of your package. So you could change it, if your template has a title of divorce complaint, you could change the title on LHI to divorce package, and what the user will see then is when they launch the interview, they're going to see that they're launching something called divorce package, but when they get the documents, they're going to get something that says divorce complaint, divorce summons, whatever titles you've given to the individual documents. On the old LHI, we just let you specify the title, and we didn't pick it up from the Hot Docs title at all. But one it's important to realize is that the title of the template in the local environment is what's being used to determine the name of the assembled document, but it's not, and it's being used initially to determine the title on LHI in the template metadata, but you can change that, and that title, the LHI metadata title, is not used anywhere except when it's displayed to the user to say, hey, this is the template you're using. So that's just something to bear in mind. I think I've covered pretty much anything, unless Mark, if there's something you want me to show beyond what I've shown.
In a minute, probably, we want to talk about repeats part, but there is a question from Craig Harrison. Does the order of the /NW and /STW matter? The command line parameters?
No, it does not matter.
Don't worry about that.
No, don't worry about it, yeah.
All right. Let me grab back the presenter role and show a few more slides, and then we're going to have time for questions. Okay, so I think I was here. Some of this I think Bart covered already quite well, which is when it comes to A to J, the way you invoke multiple document assembly from A to J is to have assembled statements in the template that A to J interview is linked to. And as a result, if that's an RTF or a PDF, that document, that template, is always going to assemble. So you've got one non-optional document that will always assemble, and you should never run into a problem with nothing being assembled and the resulting potential errors on LHI. With Hot Docs, though, as Bart showed, you can use these interview templates, these CMP file only, component file only templates, and the interview itself can launch the assemble of one or more documents, one or more templates, and so you have full control over what gets assembled. But as a consequence, you also have the danger of your logic resulting in nothing being assembled, and then when the user presses the Get Document button, they'll get an error message. So we'll talk about that being an important thing to avoid. As Bart mentioned, the assembled file names, it's a little confusing, but the key concept is the template that's going to result in a assembled file, its title in its component properties is what's going to be used to name the assembled files. So a minute ago when I showed you the consumer debt defense system and we had an affidavit and an answer or something like that, the names of those files were drawn from the title of the template corresponding to the template being assembled. And that's an attribute of the component file. As Bart said, when you upload a template to LHI now, it takes that title as the default name of the entire package. You can edit it in metadata, but the edited metadata is not going to affect the name of the file. The name of the file is controlled by the title of the template in its own component properties. And one other twist here is when you're assembling a repetitive number of instances of a document, say you've got a particular form that needs to be done for each child, HotDocs will, LHI will actually put a number on the document name so that each one has a unique file name for purposes of downloading. The upload process is reasonably straightforward, as Bart described. With A2J, of course, you need to have a assembling HotDocs template in existence, and that's the one you point to from A2J. So when A2J hands off its answers to HotDocs, the template it's running is one that's scripted to assemble more than one file out of it. With HotDocs, it used to be in the old processes we used to upload to LHI, you had to be sure to check some boxes to include templates used to insert and assemble instructions, and you had to be really careful to specify what was the main template file. All of that is going away. Now on LHI, you just right-click on the right item in your HotDocs library, and all of this stuff is taken care of for you. Bart made a good point about the fact that when you test a multiple document assembly template locally, you have to do that from the library. You can't, it will not actually effectuate any of the assemblies if you're testing within the template itself. So that's a common frustration. You're going, why am I not getting output files? Well, that's just the way HotDocs works. Let's talk about repeats. There are some special things you need to do when you've got logic that says repeat number of children, assemble, form X, because HotDocs for some reason forgets what repeat it's on when it's doing an assembly. And there is an advanced tutorial on the HotDocs server, the link for which is here, that describes how this works. Bart, can you sort of summarize in general what the process is, what the technique is?
Yeah, basically what you have to do is you have to use a number variable that keeps track of which repeat HotDocs is on, and you have to increment it every time the document assembles. So, for example, if you have in your template or your interview a repeat where you're repeating, say, children, and you're generating an each document for each child, you just repeatedly you put inside a repeat an assemble command for the template. But if you just do that by itself, you're going to get, if there are 3 children, you're going to get 3 documents all with respect to the same child. In other words, the first one, because HotDocs basically doesn't know if it's repeating, which repeat it's on once it launches a separate assembly. So what you would do is you would set a variable to a number variable to 1 or 0, or you can start it either 1 or 0 depending on where you increment it, and then either at the top of the template before you do anything else you would increment it if you're starting from 0, or you wait till the bottom of the template to increment it if you're starting from 1. And then inside the template you have a couple of choices. One thing you can do is you can use bracketed notation to refer to variables that are repeating. So you would use child name bracket and then the number variable that you use to keep track of what repeat you're on, and then a closed bracket, and that would give you, inside each template, would give you the particular iteration of a variable that you're trying to get to. In other words, if you just use child name, normally HotDocs is not going to know which repeat it's on at that point. Another trick that you can use, and this is particularly useful, this is very useful for templates that have, or Word templates, RTF, or DocX templates. I don't really know how you can use it in PDF templates, but in Word or DocX templates, you can put another repeat of the same repeating dialogue that encloses almost the entirety of the template. So you could say, you could have at the top of your document, increment your number var, and then repeat children, filtered on number var being equal to, or filtered on the counter for the dialogue being equal to number var. So essentially what you're doing is you're saying, okay, now repeat this entire document so that the number that I've been keeping track of, let's say it's the second repeat, it's number 2, that the counter or the repeat is equal to that number. And then so what you end up with is you end up with one iteration of the document that matches the repeat. And normally HotDocs doesn't like you to do a repeat of the same dialogue. In other words, if you did repeat children and then inside that you did repeat children, it would give you an error message. But when you do it with assemble, since it's totally forgotten about the repeat context, it's perfectly happy to let you do another repeat, again filtered on the number. So those are, that's the basic technique. It can get very complicated if you have to do things like if you have to filter the repeat. It gets very, very tricky, but that HotDocs documentation, the advanced tutorial is really excellent. If you follow that step by step, you usually be able to do at least the basic approach to handling it.
So this topic might warrant a separate session entirely to see that in action. I guess the key takeaways are you can repetitively assemble documents, so you can produce a separate document for each iteration of a person or a child or a debt or some other thing that happens more than once in a matter. And there are established techniques that let you do that properly. But out of the box, your intuition of a simple repeat is going to produce multiple iterations of the first one. And this is just a pointer to a place you can get some help about how to answer that question, how to deal with that scenario. We've already seen some examples, I think, in Desktop Developer by Bart. We may come back to a couple with questions. That's what that screen was for. Let me touch on just a few tricks and pitfalls. One is that sometimes you may want to let the user decide whether they want their documents as one file or multiple files. And so back in this consumer debt defense case I was showing you before online, let me just show you how this one actually handles that. So in this case, we've got a collection of templates, but the actual interview, the thing the user experiences on LHI, is one of these interview-only templates, the HotDocs interview template. So this is the guy that I would have done my upload from. But inside of this, let me open the component manager. The action takes place in the interview. And it's like any other kind of interview computation with as statements, etc. When you get to the end, this is where the assembles happen. And the particular trick I'm mentioning in the slides is, in this case, we can let the user decide, do they wish to see the questions, the documents combined into a single file or not. If they want them combined, what we assemble is a master template that's got all of the chosen documents inside of it through insert statements. However, if they choose separate, then we separately assemble the files. So this produces the experience where it's under the user's control. If I just do a quick test here, I can, once I have more than one document chosen, I get prompted, what output format do you want? Do you want to combine them all into a single Word file, or do you want to generate separate ones? So that's kind of handy, especially for advocates, some of whom may just want to get one file to work with, others who prefer to have everything separately organized. Pretty straightforward. Back to my slides. That's tip number one. The second one I think I just added while Bart was talking, which is one of the consequences of this /NW parameter is that you don't get prompted to save answers. No interview is presented for the subsequent documents. And so if you add the /SS, suggest save, I think that stands for, to your local library entry, while you're testing it, you will have the ability to be reminded to save answers while testing. Another important thing Bart mentioned is on present LHI, we assume when a HotDocs interview finishes that some document is being generated. And if you have a script like the one I just showed you where potentially the user can select nothing, no document will be assembled on the server, and when the user presses the Get Document button, wondering what's there, they'll get an error. So the answer to that for now is to make sure your logic always produces at least a placeholder document at the back end. Even if it only says there are no other documents to generate, that'll avoid that problem. Something else we've run into is HotDocs has got a lot of help about assemble, and much of that refers to doing assembles in desktop hot docs. And for instance, it encourages you in some scenarios to include the assemble instruction for a file in both the interview and in the template. And that should never be necessary in LHI and potentially could cause trouble. I think Karen Ganada may have run into an issue with that at one point, who was on the call. So don't, when you look at Hot Docs help about assemble, be conscious that the way it's described, the mechanics of multiple document assembly in desktop Hot Docs are not exactly the same as on server. So watch out for that. One last thing to be aware of is you can mark variables in Hot Docs component files so they don't get saved into answer files. And presently on LHI, I believe, we're not respecting that setting. So even if you do that, your answers do get saved and they end up in the answer file. But be aware that in the server environments, any answers that only exist in an interview and don't survive into the assembly process may not be available to be used in templates you're assembling, because that takes place after the interview's over. So I don't think that's a present problem, but it's a consideration you should be aware of if you get odd behavior at some point downstream. One last slide here is just potential enhancements to what we've got so far. I think the present implementation of multiple document and multiple file assembly on LHI is very robust and quite stable. You can do all the things I mentioned, mix and match, RTF, PDF, DocX, in various combinations. One thing that has been suggested is allow the user, when they've got multiple files like that, to download a zip and to have a single-click download. That's on a long list of potential enhancements. Once we start talking, it'll open up for questions. I'll be curious if that's a popular one. Another idea that relates to this is enabling some post-assembly PDFization of text documents, so that you could have a template that is an RTF template, for instance, but right before the user gets the document, it's generated as an RTF, but it's transformed into a PDF for them to download, either because it needs to be in that form for e-filing or because you don't want a user messing with it post-assembly. And the third possibility that occurred to me is when you've got multiple outputs, a combination of RTF and PDF available to the user, in addition to having a zip option to download the whole thing as one batch, potentially there may be utility in having that be turned into a single PDF. So you kind of give the end user the ability to consume your entire output without having to deal with the fact there's different file types involved. And I have a question here because I'm looking for other ideas on enhancements. So we've reached the end. I know we've thrown a lot at you, the end of our sort of primary presentation, and we're ready now to take questions. Maybe there's some more in the chat box. Looks like we're just getting some compliments about the session.